think this is one of the many topics in the wedding industry that there's just not enough information out there. You know, there's so many different options, and whether you're religious or non-religious, you still have options and you don't necessarily know what they are. So this week we're going to dive into it. Hello lovely couples and welcome back to my channel. I'm Lauren, wedding planner and owner of Bluebird Creative. I provide a weekly dose of wedding planning goodness for the modern couple. So if you haven't already guys, make sure you subscribe, then you'll get your weekly dose of wedding planning goodness. And don't forget to follow us over on TikTok and Instagram at Bluebird_creative, where we kind of do the real, the raw and the random over on stories and all the videos and tips that we give over there. So guys, this week we're going to be diving into the different types of wedding ceremony that you can have. It's often a case of people just don't realise what their options are, even when people come to me and they're not religious and they think that the only other option is having a civil ceremony, and it's not. So let's dive into the different options that you can have, how they work, pros and cons, and all the things. Let's go. So first of all, I'm just going to start off with a bit of an overview as to some of the different options that you might want for your ceremony. First of all, it's obviously, I think this is the most obvious one actually, is you need to consider, do you want a religious ceremony or do you not want a religious ceremony? Because obviously that's kind of where the divide is. So if you are of a particular religion, then the likelihood is that is the option you're going to go for with your ceremony. So whatever that religion may be, whether it's Catholic, Hindu, Jewish, Christian, the likelihood is you're going to have a typical kind of traditional religious ceremony. Maybe tweaking it, maybe relaxing some of the traditions within that ceremony. But I'm assuming, and I hate to assume, but I am assuming that the likelihood is you will go down that route, which is amazing. So let's talk about some of the other options as well as that one. So another option is to then have a civil ceremony. A civil ceremony is when a registrar from the council marries you. So it has to be in a venue that is registered with a license to marry you. So venues will have a license, not all venues will have a license. So that is something that you have to check out. You can't just get married at home. It won't be legally bound. It won't be legal. So if you were getting married abroad, for example, you might still have to have a civil ceremony over here in the UK, go to a registry office or a venue and so on to actually have that legal ceremony. The next option, which is becoming more and more popular, and I actually think we are going to see lots more people choosing this option as sort of we progress through the years, to be honest with you, and that is a celebrant-led wedding. Now, currently in the UK, a celebrant-led wedding is a non-legal wedding. So you might be thinking, well, why are people choosing that if they're not legally married? But what people will do is they will choose that and then they will have a civil ceremony at a registry office, but they don't consider that their wedding. They're just going to go do the legal paperwork. And I'm going to break down the pros and cons for all these things in a little bit in kind of the second half of this video for you. But that is simply, you choose a celebrant who will come and lead your wedding. And I'm going to dive into it a little bit more, as I said, in the next part of this video. But it's not legal, so they can do that anywhere. It doesn't have to be a particular venue that has a license. You can have it at home and so on. The last one is, I'm going to class it as a blessing, and that would be a case of, it's kind of the same thing-ish as having a celebrant, but you're not actually having somebody who is trained as a celebrant, or that is what they do for their job. So a blessing would be more of a case of, it's non-legal again, but you might be having a friend or family kind of running the ceremony for you. So I'm going to put that in a group called a blessing, because you're not taking someone on that's a professional celebrant that knows how to coordinate a beautiful ceremony for you as such. So those are the 4 different categories that I personally would put the weddings into. So you have religious, you have civil, you have celebrant-led, or you have a blessing. So now let's dive into some of the pros and cons, and also some questions that you can ask yourself to help you decide which actually suits you best and works best for your wedding day. Okay, so let's start with pros and cons for each ceremony type. So I'm going to start over with religious. Now, this one, the pros are obviously the fact that if you are of a particular religion, then you're going to be following your faith, following the traditions, and so on. One of the other pros is the fact that you can get married in a beautiful building, and you will get married by a vicar or a rabbi or whoever it is, depending on your religion, that will be hosting your ceremony. Now, the likelihood is that you will meet them beforehand. I mean, you will meet them beforehand, so you know who is running and hosting your ceremony. So that is an absolute perk for sure, because you almost build a relationship with that person and they're going to guide you through the whole ceremony. So that is a big perk for me. We then move on to a civil ceremony. So this is for people that want to do the legal wedding and they don't want to get married in a church, or they don't have an affiliation to a particular religion. They, as I said, do want the legal side, but one of the biggest cons for me for a civil ceremony is the fact that there's not much you can do to create a bespoke ceremony. So you can add little things like readings and hymns, which is lovely, but if you wanted something really bespoke to you, then a civil ceremony obviously isn't really going to cater for that. The same goes for a religious ceremony as well. There are obviously a strict structure that you follow throughout each of those ceremonies, and you can add little nuances to kind of make it your own, but at the end of the day it's going to follow a strict structure. It's going to have particular language, legal language, and so on. The thing with the registrar and the civil ceremony is that you do not know who your registrar is going to be on your wedding day. And this is something that I really wanted to just flag, because I have had so many couples that don't realise that. And they'll come to me and they'll tell me that they're having a civil ceremony. And I've had a couple before say, oh, so hopefully we can choose somebody that blah, 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 blah. You can't choose your registrar. You have absolutely no choice in the matter. Depending on where you get married, you will be married obviously under a particular county council, and they will have a selection of registrars that work for them. They sort their rota out. You do not know who is turning up on the day. Your wedding venue do not know who is turning up on the day. They literally turn up, and then the venue will go, oh, we've got Sue today, because they'll obviously be working with these registrars day in, day out on their weddings, but they do not know in advance. So you do not know in advance. So you don't know who is leading your ceremony, which for some people is an issue. For others, it really doesn't matter. But that is definitely something to consider if you want your ceremony to go in a particular way. And if you don't have control over who's doing it, then it might not be a good fit for you. Then we move on to the celebrant-led wedding. Now, flip side of that, the pro, or one of the biggest pros, is that you can choose your wedding celebrant. It's a very, very personal ceremony. So you will choose a celebrant that you connect with, that you click with, that you think, yes, this person is going to create the perfect ceremony for us. And you know who they are, and you know their type of personality, so you know what they're going to bring to the table on the day. Whereas with, for example, the civil ceremony, you don't know who's turning up. You don't know what their personality is like. You don't know if they're trying to be a comedian on the side and they're pulling that into their wedding ceremonies, because trust me, I've seen that. I have seen that. Some are amazing, some are interesting. But a celebrant-led wedding is very much a case of you choosing the right person for you. Another pro for this is obviously this is what they do. This is the vocation that they have chosen to do, the career that they have chosen to do. So they should be blooming amazing at it. They do it day in, day out, and they're passionate about love stories. Now, they will create you a bespoke wedding ceremony. They will get to know you as a couple. It's a very personal service. They want to understand your love story, your journey together. They will create a ceremony and write a script that suits you guys, fits your story, fits the vibe that you want, and so on. So lots of pros when it comes to a celebrant-led wedding. You can literally put whatever you want in the ceremony, and because they're professionals, they can guide you and give you ideas, because it's what they do day in, day out. They would have seen loads of things. They'll have lots of different ideas, loads of tips, and so on. The con with having a celebrant-led wedding is obviously the fact that it isn't legally recognised in the UK at the moment. In Scotland, it currently is, but in the UK it's not. But who's to say it won't be recognised in the next few years? That being said, you can still, as many people do, have your legal ceremony at a registry office, maybe the week of your wedding, and then on the wedding day you have a celebrant-led one, and that is what you class as your wedding ceremony. Moving on to the final one, which is a blessing. Again, you have all the perks of a celebrant-led wedding in the fact that it can be bespoke. You know who's hosting the wedding for you, you know their personality, you can connect with them. This one is a case of they know you, they already know you, so they can pull out some fun little nuggets in the ceremony that reflect and describe you guys as a couple and so on. So it can be so personal and lovely. I would say that the cons on this one, again, obviously it's not legally recognised, but there is something that you can do about that. And the fact that this isn't what they do on the daily. So you obviously want to make sure that you pick somebody that is confident in speaking in public, and you're obviously going to be sussing out how to create that ceremony together because they've never done it before. Or the likelihood is they've never done it before because you're picking a friend or a family member as opposed to somebody that actually does this day in, day out. So those are the 4 different types, and those are the pros and cons. I hope that I've made that kind of clear, and I really hope that that gives you kind of a bit of guidance on what ticks the boxes for you. I've got a couple of little tips for you guys to think about when you're deciding on which ceremony type is actually best for you. So first of all, ask yourself, where do you want to get married? Because if it's a church, then it's a church. If you want to get married in a particular venue, you need to check, have they got a license? Have they not? Do you want to get married inside or outside? Some outside spaces are licensed now, others are not. So again, location is absolutely key. How do you want your ceremony to run? That's very important. Do you want all that legal language? Do you want it really bespoke? Do you want it personal? Do you want it traditional? That's really important to kind of discuss, because then you can suss out again, which box and which category do you kind of fit into here? Do you want to know the person leading your ceremony? Because obviously with one of these, you're not going to know. With the other 3, you will do. How personal do you want the ceremony to be? Again, a religious ceremony and a civil ceremony, only a small degree can you add personalisation into those 2 different types of ceremony. And that's very much a case of hymns and readings. The last 2 are extremely personal and completely designed to what you want. So again, it depends what's important to you. And finally, something that you might want to consider is the length of ceremony. A civil ceremony tends to be between 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how many readings, how many songs, and so on you've decided to put in. A blessing and a celebrant-led ceremony typically would be around 30 minutes. But again, you could choose, because you're creating the ceremony with your celebrant or your friend or family member that's hosting your blessing. And a religious ceremony tends to be anything between sort of 30 minutes and an hour and a half, or 2 hours, depending on the religion that you are affiliated to. So Christian weddings tend to be sort of 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how religious the ceremony is and what traditions you're including. A Hindu ceremony will be up to 2 hours. So it really can depend. So definitely consider that as well. So there you go, my friends. Lots of information for you on the different types of wedding ceremony that you can have. I really hope you found this helpful, and I will see you on the next one. Have a good week.